An arrogant millionaire was saved by twin beggar girls after an accident. When he woke up, he discovered that one of the girls was wearing a necklace engraved with his wife's name. The headlights of the Porsche 911 sliced through the darkness like golden blades, piercing the curtain of rain. Robert Davies gripped the Italian leather steering wheel so tightly that his fingers turned white. The digital clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m., and each raindrop striking the windshield sounded like an accusation. "You've become a monster, Robert." Sarah's final words echoed in his mind as he sped along the winding road. The windshield wipers worked furiously, but they could barely keep up with the storm pummeling the mountainous region. The memory of that night, exactly 6 months ago, appeared as vivid as the flash of lightning that lit up the sky. Sarah had stood in the living room of the mansion, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of disappointment and fury he had never seen before. "That family had 3 children, Robert. 3, and you evicted them without even blinking. Business is business, Sarah. I can't keep unproductive employees just because they have a sad story to tell." The sound of his own voice, cold and calculating, reverberated in his memory. Sarah had put on her coat and grabbed her car keys. "You weren't always like this." "The man I fell in love with." A sharp curve loomed ahead. Robert blinked, trying to push the recollection aside. The speedometer read 85 mph. Too fast, the rain too heavy, the curve too tight. The Porsche skidded. For a moment, everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The squeal of tires on the wet asphalt sounded like an agonized scream. Robert turned the steering wheel, trying to regain control, but the car had a will of its own. Like the business deals he prized so highly, some things, once set in motion, cannot be stopped. "The man I fell in love with had a heart." Sarah's final words before slamming the door that night, before the phone call at 3:47 a.m., before the policeman's somber face appeared at his doorstep. The guardrail blurred into view, a streak of silver. The impact was deafening. Twisted metal groaned in protest as the Porsche tore through the protective barrier as if it were paper. The airbag exploded in his face with the force of a punch, and the world began to spin. 1, 2, 3 somersaults. Sky and earth traded places repeatedly as the car rolled down the embankment. Glass shattered. Metal bent. At some point, Robert felt his body jostled like a rag doll, the seatbelt cutting into his flesh through his $10,000 Italian suit. His last thought before the final impact was of Sarah's smile. Not the sad smile from that last night, but the radiant smile on the day they met, when he was just a young executive with big dreams and a heart that still knew how to beat for something beyond profit. The Porsche finally came to a halt, upside down, at the bottom of the ravine. The rain continued to fall relentlessly, finding new paths through the twisted metal to reach Robert's motionless body. The digital clock blinked one last time before dying. 11:52 p.m. 5 minutes. The time it took for a corporate empire to become a prison of crushed metal. The same amount of time Sarah had struggled after her own accident that rainy night, 6 months ago before she died. In the ensuing silence, broken only by the occasional tinkle of cooling metal and the constant drumming of the rain, a thin wisp of smoke began to rise from the crumpled hood. The acrid smell of gasoline mixed with the stench of burnt rubber and soaked upholstery. A trickle of blood ran down Robert's forehead, mingling with the rainwater that now flowed freely through the shattered windshield. His half-closed eyes focused on something gently swaying before his face, the mirrored Businessman of the Year plaque dangling from the rearview mirror. The award he'd received earlier that very evening, only hours ago, for his outstanding ability to make tough decisions for corporate growth. The irony would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. Somewhere in the darkness, thunder boomed, as though the sky itself were laughing at his predicament. Robert Davies, the ruthless magnate, the business shark, lay trapped in the wreckage of his own status symbol, as powerless as the countless employees he had laid off over the years with a simple nod. Consciousness began to slip away, draining like the rainwater now drenching his expensive suit. His last coherent thought was a memory. Sarah smiling, insisting there was still goodness in him somewhere. Then darkness swallowed him, leaving only the sound of rain and the occasional flash of lightning to witness the literal and metaphorical fall of Robert Davies. On the road above, the broken headlights of the Porsche flickered one last time, like eyes closing before going out completely. The storm continued its relentless symphony, washing the final traces of arrogance from the unconscious face of the man who believed he had everything under control. The first ray of morning sunlight barely penetrated the thick fog that had formed after the storm. Two small figures, identical as drops of water, moved stealthily among the rain-soaked trees. Sophie and Marie knew every inch of that forest as well as they knew each other perfectly. "Look, Sophie." "A rainbow." Marie pointed to the sky, her brown curls still dripping with nighttime rain. Sophie, holding her sister's hand tightly, paused to admire the multicolored spectacle. Their eyes, the same shade of honey, sparkled at the discovery. Both wore oversized coats, donations that kept the cold away from their small bodies. A metallic clank, different from the usual sounds of the forest, caught the girl's attention. Sophie, always the more cautious, squeezed Marie's hand. "Did you hear that?" Marie nodded, already tugging her sister toward the noise. They were only 6 years old, but life had already taught them to look out for each other. Barefoot, their tiny footprints marked the muddy ground as they approached the edge of the ravine. The silver Porsche lay like a wounded animal, its metallic insides exposed to the morning sky. Marie was the first to spot it, letting out a small gasp. "Sophie, look. It's like the cars Daddy had in his magazine." They approached cautiously. Sophie, clutching her tattered teddy bear, her only remaining toy, whispered, "Is there someone inside?" A weak groan answered her question. The twins exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations only identical sisters can have. Marie moved first, scrambling down the ravine with the agility of a squirrel. "Marie, be careful." Sophie followed, holding the teddy bear with one hand while using the other to steady herself on the slippery slope. The smell of gasoline was strong, mixed with something the girls couldn't identify, burnt oil and rubber. Through the shattered windshield, they saw a man in a suit hanging upside down like a bat, blood trickling down his face. "He's hurt," Marie stated, her big eyes wide with concern. Sophie stepped closer to the car, her small heart pounding. "Mister, are you alive?" Another groan, stronger this time. The man's eyes fluttered but did not open. "We need to help him," Marie decided, already tugging at her sister's coat sleeve. "Like the lady with the necklace used to do for us." Sophie nodded. The lady with the necklace, as they called their mysterious benefactor, always said helping others was the right thing to do no matter who they were. The girls worked together, as they always did. Marie found a sharp stone and began to cut through the seatbelt, while Sophie supported the man's head to keep him from dropping too suddenly. "He's heavy," Sophie panted as the body started to give way. "1, 2, 3, Marie counted, and together they managed to pull the man out of the car. Robert Davies, the powerful businessman, now lay unconscious in the care of two little homeless girls. His Italian suit was soaked and torn, his face covered in cuts, but he was breathing. "Let's take him home," Marie suggested, referring to the small shelter they had set up over the past few weeks. Sophie bit her lip, hesitant. "How?" Marie was already on the move, scrambling back up the ravine. "Our old blanket, the one we used to play fort." Minutes later, the twins had turned their tattered blanket into a sort of makeshift sled. With a determination that defied their tiny bodies, they began hauling Robert through the forest. "Stop! Stop!" Sophie gasped every few steps. "We can do it," Marie encouraged, pulling with all her little might. "Think of it like when we carry our teddy." The sun rose higher in the sky as the girls continued their mission. They stopped occasionally to rest, at which point Sophie checked if the man was still breathing, just like she'd seen in movies. Their home was a small natural cave, partly covered by old tarps they had found. Inside, a nest of blankets and cardboard served as a beddie, and a few cans of food, gifts from kind strangers, made up their pantry. With one last heroic effort, they managed to drag Robert inside. Marie immediately began cleaning the cuts on his face with a piece of clean cloth they kept for emergencies, while Sophie arranged the blankets to make him more comfortable. "He's shivering," Sophie observed worriedly. Marie took off her own oversized coat and placed it on the man. Sophie did the same, leaving themselves in just their thin sweaters for warmth. "The lady with the necklace always said we need to take care of others," Marie recalled, sitting down next to her sister. Sophie hugged her teddy bear, watching the stranger who now occupied their little sanctuary. "Do you think he's going to be okay?" "Sure he is," Marie answered with the unwavering certainty only a 6-year-old can have. "We'll take care of him." The twins settled down side by side, standing guard over their makeshift patient. The sun was now shining brightly outside, but inside the cave, a different kind of warmth took hold, the warmth of innocent compassion from two children who, despite having so little, did not hesitate to share what they had. Sophie took the last cookie from their small stash and carefully split it in half, giving one piece to her sister. As they chewed in silence, they watched Robert's chest rise and fall, making sure he was still breathing. "You know what?" Marie whispered, resting her head on her sister's shoulder. "I think the lady with the necklace would be proud of us." Sophie smiled, holding her sister's hand. The necklace bearing the name Sarah glinted softly against her skin, as if in agreement. Outside, the rainbow still stretched across the sky, a silent witness to the act of kindness by two little heroines who, without knowing it, were about to change not only Robert Davies's life, but also their own destinies. Consciousness returned in a violent wave. Robert Davies opened his eyes to find an irregular stone ceiling, lit by a dim glow. His entire body ached, and the smell of damp earth and mildew invaded his nostrils. He tried to move, and a sharp pain shot through his torso. "He's awake!" a childish voice whispered. Robert turned his head abruptly toward the sound, a movement that made his vision momentarily black out. When he managed to focus again, he saw two pairs of honey-colored eyes watching him curiously from behind a stack of cardboard boxes. Where the hell am I?" His voice came out rough, like sandpaper. Two identical girls emerged from their improvised hiding spot. Their brown hair was disheveled, and their clothes, clearly several sizes too large, were dirty and worn. "You're in our home," one of them answered, stepping forward. "I'm Marie, and this is my sister, Sophie." Robert looked around, his face contorting in disgust as he took in the surroundings. Old tarps, torn blankets, empty food cans piled in a corner. It wasn't a home, it was a hole. "What kind of joke is this?" He tried to sit up, ignoring the searing pain. "Where's my phone? I need to make a call right now." Sophie, the more timid of the two, took a step back. "You were hurt in your car." "We helped you," Marie completed, still wearing her innocent smile. Robert finally managed to sit upright, noticing the children's coats draped over him. With a brusque motion, he threw them to the ground. "You!" He pointed an accusing finger at the girls. "You brought me to this dump?" Marie nodded proudly. "We used our blanket to drag you here." "You little—" Robert took a deep breath, trying to control his growing anger. "Do you have any idea how expensive this suit is? And now it's ruined, covered in mud and—" He stopped, running a hand over the soaked fabric. "Where is my wallet?" Sophie clutched her teddy bear tighter. "We didn't take anything." "Liars!" Robert roared, making the girls jump. "You little street thieves, is that it? You dragged me to this hole to rob me?" Marie stepped forward, placing herself protectively in front of her sister. "We just wanted to help, like the lady with the necklace always did for her. Give me a phone, now." Robert tried to stand, swaying. His vision darkened again, but his rage kept him upright. "I'll call the police and make sure you—" That was when he saw it. The sudden movement made Sophie recoil, and the light entering through the cave's opening caught something shimmering around her neck. A delicate gold necklace. Robert froze. His heart, which was pounding in fury, seemed to stop for a moment. "That necklace!" His voice lost all its strength. Where did you get that?" Instinctively, Sophie's hand flew to the necklace, her small fingers touching the plate where the name Sarah was delicately engraved. "It was a gift," she whispered, taking another step back. Robert lurched forward, forgetting his pain completely. "That's impossible." His voice echoed around the cave. "That necklace, I gave it to my wife." Marie stood firmly between Robert and her sister. Even at her small size, there was surprising strength in her stance. "The lady with the necklace gave it to Sophie. She was really kind to us." Robert staggered, leaning against the cave wall. His legs trembled, and not just from his injuries. "What did she look like?" "The woman who gave you the necklace." Sophie, still hiding behind her sister, spoke in a low voice. "She had really pretty green eyes, and she always smiled at us." The world seemed to spin around Robert. He let himself slide down the wall until he was seated on the floor, his eyes fixed on the necklace glinting on Sophie's neck. "Sarah." The name slipped from his lips like a prayer. A heavy silence settled over the cave. The twins stayed close together, watching the man who seemed to have been hit by an invisible blow. All his previous fury had turned into something else, something that looked like raw pain. Marie, the bolder one, took a small step toward him. "Did you know the lady with the necklace?" Robert looked up, and for the first time the girls saw tears in his eyes. Before he could answer, a powerful wave of dizziness hit him, and the world began to fade out again. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the glow of the necklace, the last gift he had given Sarah, now hanging from the neck of a little homeless girl who, along with her sister, had just saved his life. The twins watched in silence as Robert slipped back into unconsciousness. Sophie held the necklace in one hand and her sister's hand in the other. "Marie," she whispered, "I think the lady with the necklace was his wife." Marie nodded slowly, her eyes on the unconscious man. "But why didn't she ever talk about him to us?" The question went unanswered, echoing silently in the small cave as the first droplets of a new rain began to fall outside. The fever had subsided by the time Robert opened his eyes again. Afternoon light slipped lazily through the cave's opening, casting dancing shadows on the uneven walls. His body hurt less, but a different, deeper pain throbbed in his chest, an older wound. The twins were sitting at a safe distance, sharing a piece of stale bread. When they noticed he was awake, they exchanged uneasy glances. Sophie instinctively covered the necklace with her hand. Robert sat up slowly, this time without the previous anger. His eyes were fixed on the small piece of gold gleaming around the girl's neck. "I'm sorry," his voice came out raspy, surprising even him with its gentleness. I lost my temper earlier." Marie, still protective, moved slightly in front of Sophie. "So you yelled at us?" "I know." Robert swallowed hard. "That necklace, there's a story behind it." Sophie, still partly hidden behind her sister, whispered, "It belongs to the lady with the necklace." "Sarah," Robert corrected gently. Her name was Sarah. He closed his eyes for a moment, as though saying that name aloud caused him physical pain. "She was my wife." The girls exchanged glances again, having one of those silent twin conversations. "She used to visit us at the old shelter," Sophie began hesitantly. "She always brought food and blankets." "And stories," Marie chimed in, her eyes lighting up at the memory. "She told the best stories." Robert felt a pang in his heart. Sarah had always had a gift for storytelling. It was one of the first things that attracted him to her ability to turn simple words into magic. "When was the last time you saw her?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sophie toyed with the necklace, a habit she clearly developed. "It was on the night of the big rain." She looked sad. "Sadder than usual," Marie added. "She cried when she hugged us goodbye." Robert felt as though someone had doused him in cold water. The night of the big rain, the last night, the night they fought, the night she drove off. "She gave me the necklace before she left," Sophie continued, her small voice trembling with emotion. "She said it was so I'd always remember there's kindness in the world, even when everything seems dark." Robert reached out a trembling hand toward the necklace. "May I?" Marie instantly placed herself in front of her sister, her honey-colored eyes hardening. "No, the necklace is Sophie's now." "Marie," Sophie gently touched her sister's shoulder. "No," Marie insisted. "You saw how he yelled at us before. The lady with the necklace gave it to you, Sophie. It's yours." Robert lowered his hand, defeated. "Your sister's right. I'm sorry." He took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "That necklace, I gave it to Sarah on our last wedding anniversary. I had her name engraved on it. In pretty letters," Sophie added, her fingers tracing the engraved letters. "She told us it was special because it was given with love," Robert finished, his voice breaking on the last word. A heavy silence enveloped the cave. Outside, a bird chirped, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside the small shelter. "Why didn't she ever mention you to us?" Marie asked abruptly, her suspicion still evident. Robert let out a bitter laugh. "Because I didn't deserve to be mentioned. He paused, the words catching in his throat. "I became someone she didn't recognize anymore." Sophie, in a move that surprised everyone, including her sister, took a tiny step forward. "She always said people can change. Sometimes they just need to remember who they used to be." The little girl's words hit Robert like a punch to the gut. How many times had Sarah tried to tell him the same thing? "She was right," he muttered, more to himself than to the girls. She was always right. Marie, still wary but softening her stance slightly, asked her what happened to her. Why did she stop coming? Robert felt tears sting his eyes. How to explain to two 6-year-olds that the woman they admired so much had died because of him? That her final night on Earth had been stained by an argument about his lack of humanity? She had to go away," he managed to say, his voice choked. "Somewhere very far." Sophie touched the necklace again, and this time there was understanding in her young eyes. "Like our parents." Robert nodded, unable to speak. "We miss her," Marie said softly, finally letting her guard down. "She made us feel special." "She had that gift," Robert agreed, wiping away a defiant tear. "She could see the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." Sophie, summoning courage that surprised even her sister, approached Robert. Still holding the necklace, she said, "The lady with the necklace, Sarah, she would have liked you to know we're taking good care of her gift." Robert felt his heart, an organ he'd allowed to turn to stone over the years, melt a little at the girl's words. "I'm sure she would," he answered gently. "Sarah couldn't have chosen anyone better to keep it safe." Marie, seeing her sister was safe, relaxed completely. "Do you want to hear the stories she used to tell us?" Robert nodded, unable to hold back tears now. "Yes," he whispered. "Please, tell me everything about her." And so, as afternoon turned to evening, two little homeless girls retold Sarah's stories to the man she had loved and tried to save. The necklace glowed softly on Sophie's neck, like a silent promise that sometimes love finds mysterious ways to mend broken hearts. Night wore on as light rain drummed on the cave's entrance. Robert, now seated on one of the tattered blankets, watched the twins share their last can of soup. "You need to tell me more about Sarah," he requested, his voice now gentle, almost pleading. "How did she find you?" Marie blew on her spoonful of soup before answering. "It was after we arrived at the old shelter. Sophie was sick." "Really sick," Sophie added quietly. "I couldn't stop coughing." Robert noticed how Marie subconsciously moved closer to her sister at the mention of that memory. "Sarah showed up with medicine and a warm blanket," Marie continued. "She stayed with us all night, telling stories until Sophie fell asleep." "Typical of her," Robert murmured, a sad smile forming on his lips. "Sarah always knew exactly what people needed." Sophie fiddled with the necklace as she spoke. "She asked about our family, but we didn't want to talk at first." "Why not?" Robert asked softly. The girls exchanged glances, that silent communication that felt second nature to them. "Because it hurt too much," Marie finally answered. "Talking about Mom and Dad," Robert felt his heart clench. "What happened to your parents?" "They worked for a company," Sophie began, her voice trembling slightly. "Dad always said it was a good company, that he was proud to work there. But then everything changed, Marie finished, her little hand finding her sister's. He came home crying one day. He never cried. Meanwhile, miles away at Davies Enterprises headquarters, Paul Martinez, head of security, stood before a room of monitors, phone pressed to his ear. "No, Ms. Catherine, still no sign of Mr. Davies," he informed the housekeeper. "The security cameras show his Porsche passing the last checkpoint at 11:43 p.m., but after that..." Paul ran a hand over his tired face. It had been a long night, and the coming hours promised to be even longer. Back at the cave, Robert listened intently as the girls continued their story. "The company shut down the place where Dad worked," Sophie explained. "He said some very important man decided they didn't need it anymore." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. Do you remember the name of the company?" Marie frowned, thinking hard. "Davies. Something. Dad always said the owner was a very rich man who didn't have a heart." The world seemed to spin around Robert, his own company, his own decisions. "What happened next?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Mom and Dad tried to find other jobs," Sophie continued, "but it was hard, really hard, so we had to leave our home. They promised it was just for a while," Marie quickly added, "that we'd only stay in the shelter until they found new work. But they never came back," Sophie whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. Robert closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his past actions like never before. How many other families had he destroyed with his strategic decisions? At the company headquarters, Paul received another worrying update. "They found the car." He stood abruptly. "What do you mean, destroyed? And Mr. Davies?" The twins, unaware of the search being mobilized, continued their tale. "Sarah, she tried to find our parents," Marie said. "She promised she'd help." "She always brought us news," Sophie added. "Told us not to lose hope." Robert swallowed hard. "When was the last time you saw your parents?" 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days, Marie replied promptly. "We count every day." Robert's heart broke a little more. These girls, who had just saved his life, were direct victims of his ruthless business decisions. "Sarah knew all this?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Sophie nodded. "That's why she cried so much that last night. She said she was going to fix things, that she was going to talk to someone important. She was coming to talk to me." Robert realized out loud. "On the night of the accident, she was on her way back from seeing you." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of rain. Paul, at his desk, organized search teams. "I want every side road checked. If Mr. Davies left the main highway, we need to find him before..." He paused, watching a red dot blinking on the digital map. The car's tracker. Back in the cave, Robert summoned his courage to ask the next question. Do you want to find your parents?" The girl's eyes lit up instantly. "More than anything in the world," Marie exclaimed. "We pray for that every night," Sophie added softly. Robert felt a new determination surge within him, unlike the one that had driven him in business for so many years. This was a resolve born of regret and a desire for redemption. "I promise," he said, his voice firm despite the physical pain he still felt. "I'll help you find them. It's the least I can do." "Why?" Marie asked, her distrust resurfacing. Robert looked at the necklace on Sophie's neck, glinting softly in the weak light. "Because it's what Sarah would have done." And because he hesitated, the words heavy on his tongue, "because maybe it's time I start fixing some of the things I broke." At that moment, faint sirens began to sound in the distance. Paul and his rescue team were getting closer. The girls tensed at the noise, but Robert reassured them, "Don't worry, they're people who work for me. They can help us find your parents." Sophie gripped the necklace tightly. The lady with the necklace, Sarah. Would she be happy about that? Robert felt tears prick his eyes again. "Yes," he answered softly. "She finally got me to see what really matters. Even if it's too late for both of us." The sirens drew closer, but within that makeshift shelter, something important was happening. The stone heart of Robert Davies was, at long last, beginning to thaw. Night fell heavily on the small cave, bringing with it a fever that sent Robert drifting in a sea of memories. His body trembled despite the pile of tattered blankets the twins had layered over him. The sirens that once sounded near had faded amidst the storm, which had returned in full force. "He's burning up," Sophie whispered, placing her tiny hand on Robert's forehead. Marie dampened a piece of cloth in the rainwater dripping through the cave entrance. "Like when you were sick that day, remember? The lady with the necklace and Sarah, she did this." Carefully, Marie laid the wet cloth on Robert's forehead. He mumbled incoherent words in his feverish delirium. "Sarah, forgive me." At the Davies mansion, Catherine Anderson paced back and forth in her small office. Having served as the family's housekeeper for 30 years, she knew every detail of Robert and Sarah's lives. Her phone rang again. "Mr. Paul, any news?" "The sirens must have scared someone off," the head of security's tired voice replied. "We found small footprints near the car. They look like children's." Catherine sat down abruptly. "Children?" Her heart raced. "Paulie, I need you to check every shelter and nearby community. Sarah, she used to..." In the cave, Robert sank deeper into his memories. "Robert, please listen to me." Sarah stood in the doorway of his office, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "There are real people behind these numbers. Business is business, Sarah. You'll never understand." "No," she answered softly. "It's you who no longer understands." Don't go," Robert murmured, turning restlessly. Sophie and Marie exchanged worried looks. The fever seemed to be getting worse. "We need to get him to drink water," Marie decided, remembering the care Sarah once gave them. Sophie grabbed a half-empty water bottle, their last supply. Gently, they tried to help Robert drink. The memory shifted. Now he was in the mansion's garden, watching Sarah plant her roses. It was spring, and she hummed softly as she worked. "Why do you insist on doing this yourself?" he'd asked. "We can hire gardeners." Sarah smiled, that smile that always lit up his world. "Some things need to be done by our own hands, love. That's how we keep our humanity." "The roses," Robert mumbled. "I need to take care of the roses." "What roses?" Marie asked quietly. Sophie adjusted the damp cloth on his forehead. "I think he's dreaming." Meanwhile, Catherine had found something significant. In a locked drawer of Sarah's desk, she discovered a diary. The last entries mentioned 2 twin girls at a shelter near the road where Robert had disappeared. "Paul," she said urgently on the phone, "look for twin girls. Sarah used to visit them regularly. They may be our only lead." In the cave, Robert's fever peaked. "Why didn't you ever tell me about your volunteer work?" He was in a hospital, holding Sarah's cold hand. "How you stopped asking about my day a long time ago, Robert." Her voice was weak, but her eyes still bright. "You stopped caring about anything that couldn't be turned into profit." "Sarah, please, don't leave me. Promise me you'll go back to being the man I fell in love with. Promise you'll open your heart again." "I promise," Robert whispered in the cave's darkness. "I promise, Sarah." The twins, exhausted but determined, continued their childlike nursing. Marie told stories Sarah used to tell, while Sophie held Robert's hand as Sarah did when she was sick. "Will he get better?" Sophie asked, worried. "He will," Marie replied confidently. "We promised Sarah we'd help people. Remember." The scene shifted again. It was his first meeting with Sarah, at a simple cafe near their university. He had spilled coffee on her notes, and she offered her own papers for him to copy. "You don't have to do that," he said, embarrassed. "The world is better when we help each other," she replied with that smile that would make him fall hopelessly in love. Catherine followed one lead after another. Sarah's diary revealed a world Robert never knew or chose to ignore. Pages upon pages about the people she helped, the lives she touched. "The twins," Catherine murmured, reading a recent entry. "Sophie and Marie, orphaned by a factory closure." Her heart stopped momentarily. "Oh, Robert, you don't know what you've done." In the cave, Robert's fever began to subside. He opened his eyes briefly, seeing 2 small figures asleep beside him. For a moment, in his hazy mind, he saw Sarah smiling at him from behind the girls. "You always knew, didn't you?" he asked Sarah in his memory. "You always knew I would need them to find my way back." Sarah's smile in his mind was both sad and hopeful. "Sometimes we have to lose everything to remember who we really are, Robert." "Catherine," Paul said over the phone, "we found something, a small makeshift shelter in the area. There are signs of recent activity." The housekeeper was already grabbing her coat. "I'm on my way." "And Paul, if we find the girl?" "Yes. They're the key to bringing Robert back, and a piece of Sarah as well." The sun began to rise when Robert fully awoke for the first time in hours. The fever had passed, leaving only residual weakness and a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Sophie and Marie were curled up beside him, like two little guardian angels. Sarah's necklace still shone on Sophie's neck, catching the first rays of sunlight filtering into the cave. Robert watched them for a long moment. In their innocent faces, he saw all the people he had ignored over the years in his relentless pursuit of success. In their worn clothing and awkward but sincere nursing, he saw the humanity Sarah had tried so hard to preserve in him. "You did it, my love," he whispered into the morning air. "You found a way to save me even after you were gone." In the distance, sirens began to sound again, but this time, Robert did not fret. He knew that when Catherine and Paul found him, they wouldn't just find the businessman Robert Davies. They would find a man who, through fever and memories and the care of two little orphan girls, had finally rediscovered his own humanity, the humanity Sarah always believed he still had. The girls stirred, beginning to wake. Marie was the first to open her eyes. "Is the fever gone?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep but filled with concern. Robert smiled, a genuine smile, something he hadn't done in a long time. "It's gone," he answered softly. "Thanks to you two." Sophie woke next, immediately checking his forehead the way she'd seen Sarah do many times. "Are you going to be okay now?" she asked. Robert looked at the two girls, feeling his heart, frozen for so long by numbers and profits, melt completely. "Yes," he answered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Because of you and because of Sarah, I think I'm finally going to be okay." The sirens were closer now, and with them came Catherine, carrying Sarah's diary and years of memories. Morning sunlight spilled into the cave, promising a new day and with it, a new chance to set things right. Robert Davies had set out the previous night as a man lost in his own coldness. Now, through fever, memories, and the care of two little orphans, he was finally finding his way back. Not just home, but back to the person Sarah always knew he could be. The sound of careful footsteps echoed near the cave's entrance. Catherine Anderson, her grey hair neatly pinned in a bun and still wearing her formal housekeeper's uniform, stopped at the entrance, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. "Mr. Davies," her familiar voice carried a mix of concern and relief. Robert, still sitting between the twins, looked up. "Catherine?" The girls instinctively drew closer to each other, but something about the older woman's face made Sophie's eyes widen. "Aunt Cat," she whispered, recognizing the woman who occasionally accompanied Sarah on her visits. Catherine brought a hand to her lips, tears welling in her eyes. "Sophie, Marie, oh, my dear little ones." Before Robert could process their familiarity, Catherine was inside the cave, kneeling with difficulty on the uneven ground to hug the girls. "You're both so thin," she murmured, studying their faces with expert eyes. "How long has it been since you ate properly?" Marie, ever direct, asked. "You really knew the lady with the necklace, Sarah?" Catherine sat on a nearby rock, her gaze meeting Robert's before returning to the twins. "Yes, sweetheart. In fact, I helped Sarah with her secret work." "Secret?" Robert shifted, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "Catherine, you knew everything." The housekeeper pulled something from her purse, a well-worn blue diary. "Sarah confided in me, Mr. Davies. Someone had to help her organize the donations and keep track of the records." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Robert's voice sounded more hurt than accusatory. Catherine opened the diary with reverent care. "It wasn't my secret to share." "Sarah, She hoped one day you'd notice on your own, that you'd wonder about her absences, ask questions. Sophie approached Catherine timidly, the necklace shining at her throat. "Were you here that day?" "Yes, dear." Catherine ran her wrinkled fingers over a diary page. "The last day." Sarah was different. Robert closed his eyes, knowing that that day was the day of the fight, the day of the accident. Marie, sensing his anguish, surprisingly placed her tiny hand on his. Catherine continued, her voice gentle. Sarah arrived earlier than usual. She was carrying more donations than ever, new blankets, medicine, food. "And the necklace," Sophie murmured softly. "Yes, the necklace." Catherine looked at Robert. She spent the whole afternoon with the girls. Told stories, braided their hair, even sang a bit. "Catherine," Sarah had said that afternoon, watching the girls play, "I think I've finally found a way to make Robert understand." Sarah had a plan, Catherine revealed, closing the diary. "She wanted to bring you here, Robert. She wanted you to meet the girls, to see the real impact of your corporate decisions." Robert felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. "Their parents worked at the factory you shut down," Catherine confirmed gently. Sarah stumbled across that fact by accident when the girls showed her a photo of their dad wearing your company's uniform. Sophie and Marie looked at each other, confused by the adults' conversation. Catherine noticed their discomfort and pulled 2 small packets of cookies from her bag. As the girls ate hungrily, she continued her story. "On that last afternoon, Sarah took off the necklace, your anniversary present. I tried to stop her." "Why?" Robert asked, though he suspected the answer. "Because it was her most precious gift," Catherine said. "But Sarah," she smiled that special way of hers and said, "sometimes we have to give up something precious to gain something even more valuable." Sophie unconsciously touched the necklace. "She called me aside," the girl recalled. "She said it was a very special present." "She knelt in front of you," Catherine continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "Put the necklace on you and said that I should always remember there's love in the world," Sophie finished, tears running down her small cheeks. "Even when everything seems dark and sad." Robert could no longer hold back his own tears. She knew one day I'd find you." Catherine nodded. "Sarah always believed destiny has its own plans. She said the necklace would find a way to lead you back to the right path. But she never came back," Marie said sadly. "We waited and waited." Silence fell again. Catherine took a handkerchief from her pocket and dabbed at her eyes. "Sarah left that night to talk to you, Robert," she revealed. "She was determined to open your eyes. She said she had all the evidence she needed in her diary. Every family affected, every life changed. And then I pushed her away," Robert whispered, "with my arrogance, my coldness. And she drove off in the storm," Catherine finished gently. "But before she left, she made me promise 2 things. That I'd keep caring for the people she helped, and that if you ever made your way here, I'd help you find your way back." The girls, who had finished their cookies, huddled close to Catherine again. There was something about her that reminded them of Sarah, maybe the same kindness in her eyes, the same care in her gestures. "Now what?" Sophie asked, her small voice filled with hope. Catherine looked at Robert, who seemed to be processing everything he'd learned. "Now, my dears, we do what Sarah always wanted. We help Mr. Davies remember who he really is." "And find our parents?" Marie asked anxiously. "Yes," Robert answered before Catherine could speak. His voice was firm, resolute. "I'll do what I should have done a long time ago. I'll fix what I broke." Catherine smiled, a smile that carried years of loyalty not just to the Davies family, but to Sarah's dream of a kinder world. "Sarah would be proud," she said softly. "This is the man she fell in love with." The sun was fully up now, flooding the small cave with golden light. The necklace around Sophie's neck gleamed like a bridge between the past and the future, between what was lost and what could still be reclaimed. Paul and the rescue team waited discreetly outside, granting them the privacy they deserved at this moment. Inside the cave, 4 people, a once-lost businessman, a loyal housekeeper, and 2 little orphan girls, were bound by the legacy of a woman who never stopped believing in goodness, even when the world seemed to forget. Morning light danced through the cave's entrance, creating a play of light and shadow that seemed to mirror Robert's own internal conflict. Catherine, seated on a smooth rock, leafed through Sarah's diary reverently, while the twins snuggled up on either side of Robert as if they had decided to adopt him. "Mr. Davies," Catherine began, her voice gentle but firm, "there's a lot you don't know about Sarah's work, about the life she led when she wasn't trying to reach you." Robert swallowed, feeling the weight of unspoken words. "Please, Catherine, tell me everything." The housekeeper nodded, opening the diary to a marked page. "Sarah started her volunteer work shortly after your 5th wedding anniversary. It was when I cancelled our trip to stay at the company," Robert finished, shame evident in his tone. "Yes," Catherine confirmed. She was hurt, but instead of becoming bitter, Sarah channeled her energy into something positive. Marie, curious as ever, leaned forward to see the diary. "What are all those names?" Catherine smiled kindly. "They're all the children Sarah helped over the years, dear. Look, here you two are." The girls leaned in closer, their eyes wide as they saw their names carefully written in Sarah's elegant handwriting. "Sarah started by visiting a local shelter," Catherine continued, but soon realized there was a lot more to be done. She built a support network, connecting families in need with resources, offering tutoring for kids, organizing donations of food and clothing. Robert closed his eyes, recalling the countless nights Sarah came home late, exhausted, yet with a sparkle in her eyes he never fully understood. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Catherine looked at him with a mix of compassion and reproach. "At first she tried, but you were always busy, always focused on your next merger or acquisition. Over time, she stopped trying." The words hit Robert like a punch. How many times had he brushed off Sarah's attempts to talk, claiming he was too busy? Sophie, sensing Robert's sadness, placed her small hand on his. "The lady with the necklace. Sarah, she always talked about you." Robert looked at the girl, surprised. "She did," Marie nodded enthusiastically. "She said you were a good man who just got a little lost." Catherine smiled sadly. "Sarah never gave up hope that you'd one day find your way back to who you used to be." "And who was that?" Robert asked, almost fearing the answer. "The man who fell in love with her in a simple cafe," Catherine answered gently. "The man who once dreamed of changing the world for the better, not just making profits." Robert felt tears sting his eyes. He remembered that man, those dreams. When did he lose sight of them? "Sarah believed your soul was still there," Catherine went on, "hidden under layers of ambition and cynicism. She kept every newspaper clipping of your business successes. Did you know?" "What?" Robert was genuinely surprised. Catherine nodded. "She said one day, when you finally opened your eyes, you'd want to see the contrast between what you achieved and what you lost in the process." The twins, sensing the seriousness of the conversation, shifted uncomfortably. Marie, ever practical, asked, "Can we show him the pictures now?" Catherine smiled, grateful for the interruption. "Of course, dears. Mr. Davies, the girls have something they'd like to show you." Sophie stood and walked to a corner of the cave, returning with a worn shoebox. She opened it carefully, revealing a handful of photographs. "These are our parents," she said, her voice heavy with longing. Robert took the photos with trembling hands. The first showed a smiling man in a Davies Industries uniform. Beside him, a beautiful woman held 2 identical babies. "Dad always said he was proud to work at your company," Marie commented, pointing to the emblem on the uniform. Robert's heart clenched. He vaguely remembered visiting that factory years ago, shaking hands and making promises of a bright future. Promises he broke with one signature on a closure document. "They look so happy," he murmured, moving on to the next photo. This one showed the twins a bit older, maybe 4 years old, blowing out candles on a simple cake. Their parents stood in the background, faces beaming with pride. "That was our last birthday at home," Sophie said quietly. Catherine, watching the scene, added softly, "Sarah was there that day. She took this photo." Robert looked at Catherine, stunned. She knew their family personally." Catherine nodded. "Sarah followed their struggle from the moment the factory shut down. She tried to talk to you about it several times, but I never listened," Robert finished, the realization of his failures weighing on him like a ton of bricks. The last photo made Robert gasp. It was a picture of Sarah, smiling broadly, with the twins in her arms. In the background, he recognized the mansion's rose garden. When was this taken?" he asked, barely above a whisper. 3 days before the accident," Catherine answered softly. "Sarah brought the girls for a special day in the garden. She planned to tell you everything that night." Robert closed his eyes, recalling the argument, the harsh words, Sarah leaving in the rain. If only he had listened. If he had just given her a few minutes. "She never stopped being the woman you fell in love with, Mr. Davies," Catherine said gently. "She just grew, expanded her heart to embrace more people who needed her." The twins, sensing the emotion in the air, moved closer to Robert again. Sophie, her words echoing Sarah's wisdom, said, "The lady with the necklace. Sarah, she taught us that love is like a candle. You can share its light with other candles without losing your own flame." Robert looked at the girl, seeing in her an echo of Sarah's wisdom. He turned to Catherine, a new determination in his eyes. "I want to know everything, Catherine, every detail of Sarah's work, every life she touched. I want to see the world through her eyes again." Catherine smiled, a look of sadness and hope mingling on her face. "That's exactly what Sarah always wanted, Mr. Davies. She knew that one day you'd find your way back." As the sun climbed higher, flooding the cave with light, Robert Davies began to listen to the full story of his wife's legacy of love. With each word, each photo, each diary entry, he felt the layers of coldness and indifference he'd built up over the years begin to crumble. There, in that unlikely shelter, surrounded by 2 little orphans and a loyal housekeeper, Robert began the journey of rediscovering not only who Sarah really was, but also who he himself could be. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt a spark of genuine hope. The necklace on Sophie's neck glimmered, catching a beam of sunlight. To Robert, it was as though Sarah's spirit was present, gently guiding him back into the light. The sky, clear just moments before, darkened again. Heavy, ominous clouds gathered over the small cave, as if the weather itself were reflecting the emotional turbulence within. Robert, still absorbing the revelations about Sarah, was the first to notice the change. "Looks like more rain is coming," he commented, glancing at the cave entrance. Catherine stood with difficulty, her knees protesting. "We need to leave before the storm traps us here," she said, worry evident in her voice. "The girls need a warm, safe place, and you need proper medical attention, Mr. Davies." As if to underscore her words, thunder rumbled in the distance, causing Sophie and Marie to shrink back instinctively. "I'll check with the rescue team," Catherine decided, heading toward the cave opening. "Maybe we can—" Her words were cut short by a blinding flash, followed immediately by a deafening crash of thunder. Rain began to pour in torrents, turning the ground outside the cave into a treacherous mess of mud and loose rocks. "Catherine, wait!" Robert shouted, but it was too late. The housekeeper, in her rush to find help, stepped out of the cave's relative safety. The waterlogged soil gave way beneath her feet, and with a muffled cry, Catherine slipped, tumbling several yards down the slope before coming to rest, motionless. "Aunt Cat!" the twins cried in unison, running toward the cave entrance. Robert, ignoring the pain in his ribs, stood quickly, grabbing the girls before they could dash out into the rain. "Wait!" he ordered, his voice firm but gentle. "It's dangerous out there. We have to think first." Marie struggled in his arms. "But Aunt Cat is hurt. We have to help." "And we will," Robert assured her, his mind racing. It was strange how, in a crisis, his leadership instincts kicked in, but this time not to close deals, but to save lives. "Sophie," he turned to the quieter twin, "can you see where Catherine fell?" Sophie, tears in her eyes, nodded. "She's down there, near that crooked tree." Robert nodded, formulating a plan. "Great. Marie, I need you to look for something we can use as a rope, anything long and sturdy." The girls, now with a task, seemed a bit calmer. Marie began rummaging around the small shelter, while Sophie kept her eyes on Catherine. "She moved!" Sophie exclaimed suddenly. "I think she's trying to get up." Robert joined Sophie at the cave entrance, squinting against the rain. Sure enough, Catherine was moving, but slowly and clearly in pain. "Catherine!" he shouted, trying to be heard over the storm. "Don't move! We're coming to get you!" The housekeeper lifted her head slightly, a gesture Robert took as acknowledgement. Marie returned, carrying the old blanket they had used to drag Robert. "This is all I found," she said, breathing hard. "It'll do," Robert decided, taking the blanket. With quick motions, he started twisting the fabric into a makeshift rope. "Sophie, you're the lightest," he said, turning to the girl. "I'm going to tie this around you, and you'll go down to Catherine. Marie and I will hold the other end." Sophie's eyes widened with fear, but there was determination there too. "Okay," she agreed, her voice trembling slightly. Robert worked quickly, tying one end of the twisted blanket around Sophie's waist and the other around his own. Marie gripped the middle section firmly. "Remember," Robert instructed Sophie, "once you reach Catherine, tie the blanket around her. We'll pull you both up." Sophie nodded, fear and courage mingling in her eyes. Robert felt a surge of pride for this little girl he barely knew. Carefully, they began the rescue operation. Sophie descended the slippery slope slowly, her tiny hands grasping rocks and roots, while Robert and Marie kept the blanket taut. The rain pounded relentlessly, making visibility difficult. Robert felt his muscles protest with each movement, but he refused to give up. Beside him, Marie wore a fiercely determined expression, her small arms trembling with effort. "Almost there," Robert encouraged, for Sophie's sake as well as his own and Marie's. At last, Sophie reached Catherine. The housekeeper was conscious, but clearly hurt. "Aunt Cat," Sophie whimpered, hugging the older woman. "It's all right, sweetheart," Catherine murmured, though her face was twisted in pain. "You were very brave." With shaking fingers, Sophie began tying the blanket around Catherine, following Robert's instructions. "Done!" she yelled once finished. Robert and Marie started the grueling process of pulling them back up. The mud made everything harder, and Robert felt his ribs protesting with each pull, but the determination on his face matched Marie's. "Just a little more," he encouraged, watching Sophie and Catherine inch closer to the cave entrance. With a final, Herculean effort, they managed to drag both to relative safety inside the shelter. Catherine was pale and trembling, but conscious. "Thank you," she whispered, looking at each of them with gratitude. Robert quickly checked Catherine for serious injuries. "I think it's just a sprained ankle," he diagnosed, relieved, "and some cuts and bruises." The twins, exhausted but relieved, huddled close to Catherine on either side. "You two were amazing," Robert said, looking at Sophie and Marie with admiration. "True heroes." Marie, ever practical, asked, "What do we do now? The storm's not stopping." Robert glanced at the cave entrance, where rain continued to pour in heavy sheets. The rescue team likely wouldn't reach them anytime soon. "Now," he said, a new resolve in his voice, "we take care of each other, like a family." The words came out naturally, surprising everyone, including Robert himself. But as he looked at Catherine, injured yet resilient, and at the brave twins, he realized that was exactly how he felt. "Sarah would be proud," Catherine murmured, smiling weakly. Robert felt a warm, comforting sensation spread through his chest. In this crisis, he'd finally found something he hadn't realized he was missing, a purpose larger than mergers and acquisitions. While the storm raged outside, inside the small cave, a new dynamic was taking shape. Robert, the once cold executive, now led with compassion, organizing their meager resources to keep everyone safe and comfortable. The twins, sensing the change, opened up more, sharing stories of Sarah and their parents. Catherine, despite her injury, offered words of wisdom and comfort. And there, cut off from the outside world by nature's fury, something magical began to happen. Walls came down, hearts opened, and a deep connection formed among those four unlikely companions. The storm that had physically brought them together in that cave was, unbeknownst to them, forging even deeper, lasting bonds of understanding, compassion, and perhaps most surprising of all, love. As night fell and the rain continued its relentless symphony, Robert Davies found himself reflecting on life's unexpected turns. Only days ago, he'd been a man lost in his own ambition. Now, surrounded by two little orphans and a loyal housekeeper, he was rediscovering parts of himself he had long forgotten. The necklace Sarah had once cherished still glowed on Sophie's neck, capturing the faint rays of light that entered the cave. To Robert, it felt as if Sarah herself were there, smiling and silently approving of the transformation taking place. Though the storm outside isolated them from the world, within that little cave, hearts were opening, wounds were healing, and an unexpected family was forming. Dawn brought a calm after the storm. Rays of sunlight filtered through the cave entrance, illuminating the small group that had spent the night together under extraordinary circumstances. Robert woke to the gentle sound of children's laughter, a sound that would have annoyed him days ago, but now filled his heart with warmth. Sophie and Marie were sitting near the cave entrance, playing with small, colorful stones they had collected. Their faces, though tired and a bit dirty, shone with a contagious joy. "Look, Mr. Robert," Marie exclaimed, noticing he was awake. "We're making a magic garden." Robert came closer, curious. The girls had arranged the stones into colorful patterns that, to adult eyes, might have looked like random piles of rocks. But as he knelt to see them at eye level, he began to perceive what they saw. Flowers made from red pebbles, trees from dark green stones, and even a small blue pond made of quartz fragments. "It's beautiful," he said, genuinely impressed. "How did you come up with that?" Sophie smiled shyly. "The lady with the necklace, Sarah, she always said we can find beauty anywhere if we know how to look." Her words hit Robert like a gentle wave. How many times had Sarah tried to show him that same truth? How many times had he ignored it, too busy with spreadsheets and financial reports to notice the world's magic? Catherine, observing the scene from her spot, smiled softly. "Sarah had a gift for seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary," she remarked. "I remember so many stories." The twins turned toward Catherine eagerly, their eyes sparkling with anticipation. Robert also sat down, eager to learn more about the wife he had neglected for so long. "Please tell us," he asked gently. Catherine settled in, her face lighting up with the memory. "There was a time Sarah found a family living in their car. The father had lost his job, the mother was ill, and they had two small children. Instead of just handing over money, Sarah spent days helping them turn the car into a temporary, welcoming home." "How did she do that?" Marie asked, fascinated. "Well," Catherine continued, "she brought colorful curtains for privacy, arranged comfortable cushions, and even hung fairy lights for the kids. She said that even in the hardest times, a bit of magic could make all the difference." Robert closed his eyes, picturing Sarah transforming an abandoned car into a haven of hope. How could he have been so blind to the beauty of her actions? "She changed a lot of lives, didn't she?" he asked softly. "More than you can imagine," Catherine replied. "There was a young man she helped get into college, a single mother she helped find a job, and countless children for whom she was a light in the darkness." As Catherine shared story after story, Robert felt his heart expand. Each account was a window into Sarah's world of compassion and love, a world that ran parallel to his own world of boardrooms and balance sheets. Sophie and Marie listened intently, their eyes shining with admiration for the woman they had known briefly, but who had left such a profound mark on their lives. "She never gave up on you, you know," Catherine said gently, looking directly at Robert. "Even on the hardest days, when you were most distant, Sarah believed one day you'd find your way back to who you could be. Robert felt tears burning his eyes. I was a fool, he whispered. Sophie, noticing Robert's sadness, approached him and placed her small hand on his. With a wisdom beyond her years, she said, "The lady with the necklace, Sarah, always said it's never too late to change." Robert looked at Sophie, seeing in her a reflection of Sarah's compassion. His gaze drifted to the necklace glinting at her throat. Sophie, noticing his glance, touched the necklace gently. After a moment of hesitation, she carefully took it off. "Do you want to hold it?" she offered timidly, extending the necklace toward Robert. The simple gesture took him by surprise. With trembling hands, he accepted the necklace, feeling the familiar weight of the metal in his palm. "It was her favorite," he murmured, memories flooding his mind. "I gave it to her on our 5th wedding anniversary." As Robert held the necklace, it was as though a tangible connection to Sarah had been restored. All the stories Catherine had shared, all the lessons the twins had unknowingly taught him, seemed to converge in that small piece of gold. "She knew," Robert said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "Sarah knew that one day I'd hold this necklace again, that I'd finally understand." "Understand what?" Marie asked curiously. Robert looked at the girls, at Catherine, and then back at the necklace. "That true wealth isn't in the banks or the companies. It's in the lives we touch, the love we share, the difference we make." Catherine smiled, tears in her eyes. "That's the Robert Sarah fell in love with." In that moment, something within Robert Davies changed forever. The last walls around his heart finally crumbled. He saw the world through the girl's eyes, filled with possibilities and magic. He felt the impact of Sarah's actions through Catherine's stories, and holding the necklace he once gave to Sarah as a symbol of their love, he finally understood the legacy she had left for him. "I promise," he said, his voice shaky but determined, "that from now on, I'll live in a way that would make Sarah proud. I'll use the resources I have not just to make profits, but to make a difference." Sophie and Marie, sensing the importance of the moment, scooted closer to Robert, each girl taking one of his hands. Catherine watched, silent tears trailing down her cheeks. "Sarah always said one kind act can create ripples of change," Catherine said softly. "Imagine what you can do with all the resources at your disposal, Mr. Davies." Robert nodded, a new fire blazing in his eyes. He gently returned the necklace to Sophie, who placed it around her neck again with reverence. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, flooding the cave with bright light, Robert Davies felt as though a new chapter was beginning. It wasn't just about personal redemption, but about honoring Sarah's legacy of love and creating a better future for people like Sophie and Marie. The necklace shone on Sophie's neck, like a silent promise of better days ahead. Robert Davies, the man who once lost himself in the quest for material success, had finally found his true north. The sound of helicopter blades slicing through the air announced the arrival of the rescue team. Still holding Sophie and Marie's hands, Robert felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The outside world was about to intrude on the little sanctuary they had forged in the cave. Paul, Robert's head of security, was the first to enter, worry etched on his face, which turned to profound relief when he saw his boss alive. "Mr. Davies, thank God," he breathed, rushing forward. As the medical team examined Catherine and the twins, Paul pulled Robert aside, his expression serious. "Sir, there's something I need to tell you," Paul began hesitantly. "It's about the girls." Robert felt a pang in his chest. "What about them, Paul?" Paul cast a quick glance at Sophie and Marie before lowering his voice. "We ran a background check, based on what Ms. Anderson told us. Sir, there's a direct connection to the company." Robert closed his eyes for a moment, bracing himself. "Go on." "The girls' parents," Paul said, almost in a whisper, "worked at the factory we closed 6 months ago, the one you deemed unproductive." The words hit Robert like a punch in the gut. He staggered slightly, leaning against the cave wall for support. "Show me," he demanded, his voice rough. Reluctantly, Paul retrieved a folder from his bag. Inside were copies of employee files, including photos. With trembling hands, Robert took the first photo, The face staring back at him was painfully familiar. A middle-aged man with kind eyes and a proud smile, wearing the Davies Industries uniform. The memory struck Robert like lightning. "Thomas Miller," he whispered, the name surfacing from a nearly forgotten past. Flashbacks flooded his mind. A visit to the factory years ago, Thomas, then a promising young employee, presenting innovative ideas to improve the production line's efficiency. Robert recalled being impressed, even considering a promotion. "What happened to him?" Robert asked, though he feared the answer. Paul hesitated. "After the factory closed, Mr. Miller struggled to find new work. The local economy was hit hard. He and his wife had lost everything. The girls ended up in a temporary shelter." Robert felt sick. His decisions, coldly made in a distant boardroom, had ruined real lives. Lives of people he knew, people who once trusted him. At that moment, Sophie approached timidly. "Mr. Robert, are we leaving now?" Robert knelt to look into the girl's eyes, the weight of his guilt almost unbearable. "Sophie," he began, voice shaking, "do you remember the picture of your dad you showed me?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "Dad always said he was proud to work at your company." Those words felt like a dagger in Robert's heart. He closed his eyes, gathering his courage. I knew your dad, Sophie," he finally said. "He was a good man, a dedicated employee, and I made a terrible mistake." Marie, who had joined them, asked anxiously, "Do you know where they are? Can you take us to them?" The hope in the girl's eyes was almost too much to bear. Robert felt tears well up, but forced himself to remain composed. "I promise," he said, his voice laden with emotion and resolve. "I'll do everything in my power to find your parents. I'll move heaven and earth if I have to." Standing, Robert turned to Paul with renewed determination. "Mobilize a search team immediately. Use every resource available. Find Thomas Miller and his wife." Paul nodded, already reaching for his phone. "Yes, sir, and the girls?" Robert looked at Sophie and Marie, who gazed back at him with a blend of confusion and hope. "They're coming with me," he decided, "to the mansion. I'll take care of them personally until we find their parents." Catherine, who had overheard the conversation, smiled gently despite the pain in her ankle. Sarah would be proud, Mr. Davies. As the rescue team prepared to evacuate them, Robert made a silent promise. He wouldn't rest until Thomas Miller and his wife were found. He would use every penny of his fortune, every connection he had, to reunite that family. More than that, he vowed to transform his company. No longer would it be a machine that swallowed lives in the name of profit. It would become a force for good, creating jobs, supporting communities, making the difference Sarah had always dreamed of. Boarding the rescue helicopter, Robert held tightly to Sophie and Marie's hands. The necklace shimmered on Sophie's neck, a constant reminder of the love and compassion he was determined to honor. As they rose above the trees, leaving behind the cave where so much had changed, Robert knew this was only the first step in a long journey of redemption. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive, driven by a purpose greater than himself. The helicopter flew toward the horizon, carrying not just survivors of an accident, but an improvised family bound by extraordinary circumstances and the promise of a better future. Robert Davies' office, once a shrine to business and profit, had become a command center for a far more personal mission. Maps covered the walls, marked with red pins and lines tracing potential routes. Phones rang incessantly, and a dedicated team of private investigators came and went with updates and new leads. In the midst of it all stood Robert, eyes heavy with exhaustion but burning with determination. 2 weeks had passed since the cave rescue, and every minute had been devoted to searching for Thomas and Elizabeth Miller, Sophie and Marie's parents. "Mr. Davies," Paul called, entering hurriedly, "we've got a new lead." Robert stood at once. "What did you find?" Paul handed him a report. A man matching Thomas Miller's description was spotted working at a gas station on the outskirts of a small town about 200 miles from here. Robert scanned the report, his heart racing. "And Elizabeth? There are reports of a woman working part-time at a nearby diner," Paul replied. "The descriptions match." Robert closed his eyes briefly, letting the hope flood in. Send a team immediately. I want visual confirmation and... He was interrupted by a joyful squeal from the hallway. Seconds later, Sophie and Marie burst into the office, followed closely by Catherine, who tried and failed to contain their excitement. Mr. Robert, Marie exclaimed, eyes shining. We drew a picture for you. Robert couldn't help smiling, the first genuine smile in days. He knelt, accepting the colorful paper Sophie handed him. The drawing showed 5 stick figures, 2 little girls holding hands with a man and a woman, and a taller figure beside them whom Robert guessed was meant to be himself. That's our family, Sophie explained shyly, when we find Mommy and Daddy. Robert felt a lump in his throat. Over the last few days, the twins had become an integral part of his life. The mansion, once cold and empty, now echoed with laughter and the sound of small feet running down hallways. It's beautiful, he said, his voice tight with emotion. I'll keep it here on my desk to remind me what's really important. The girls beamed, and Robert exchanged a meaningful look with Paul. The security chief got the silent message and discreetly stepped out to mobilize the search team. Catherine, sensing the tension in the air, gently suggested, Girls, why don't we make Mr. Robert a snack? He looks like he could use some energy for his important work. As Catherine led the twins away, Robert allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He picked up Sarah's necklace, now kept in his desk, after Sophie had insisted he hold on to it for luck, and squeezed it tightly. Give me strength, Sarah, he whispered. Help me fix what I broke. The following hours were a roller coaster of emotions. The search team confirmed the sightings. Thomas Miller was working double shifts at a gas station, and Elizabeth was picking up odd jobs as a waitress and cleaner. They're saving every penny, one investigator reported. From what we've gathered, they plan to travel in search of their daughters. Robert's heart broke. The image of Thomas, once a proud, promising employee, now toiling away at a gas station, was a painful testament to the consequences of his thoughtless business decisions. Prepare everything, he ordered Paul. I want a comfortable car to pick them up, first-class accommodations here at the mansion, and... He hesitated, the weight of his past mistakes bearing down on him, and a complete reintegration package, jobs, housing, whatever they need to start over. As the team set about fulfilling his orders, Robert faced an emotional dilemma. How would he tell the girls? How could he prepare them for a reunion that would surely be overwhelming? That evening, after dinner, a cheerful meal where Sophie and Marie filled the table with stories and laughter, Robert called them into the library. I have something very important to tell you, he began, his tone gentle. The girls gazed at him expectantly, their big eyes full of trust. Robert had never felt the weight of responsibility more than he did at that moment. We found your parents, he finally said. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, like a dam bursting, emotions overflowed. Marie began to cry, while Sophie froze, eyes wide in shock. Are they okay? Sophie managed to ask between sobs. Robert nodded, fighting his own tears. Yes, they're okay. Working hard, trying to find you. Marie threw herself into Robert's arms, crying openly now. When can we see them? Can we go now? Robert held her, feeling the weight of his responsibility. Tomorrow, he promised. We'll bring them here tomorrow. As he soothed the girls and answered their flood of questions, Robert also wrestled with his own fears. How would Thomas and Elizabeth react to seeing him? Could they ever forgive him? Later, after putting the girls to bed, a challenging task given their excitement, Robert returned to his office. The twins' drawing lay on his desk, a powerful reminder of what was at stake. He picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. Legal department, answered a voice. This is Robert Davies, he said, tone firm. Prepare the documents for a complete company restructuring. I want a new focus on social responsibility, reintegration programs for laid-off employees, and... He paused briefly, steeling himself. I want to start the process of renaming the company to Davies Miller Industries. Hanging up, Robert looked out the window, catching his own reflection in the glass. For the first time in a long while, he recognized the man looking back at him, the man Sarah fell in love with, the man she always believed he could be again. Tomorrow would be a new day, the beginning of a new journey, one of redemption, reconciliation, and above all love. Robert Davies was ready to take the first step. The morning sun had barely risen when the limousine pulled up to the Davies mansion. Robert stood at the entrance, heart pounding. Sophie and Marie, still in their pajamas, clung to his hands, trembling with excitement and anxiety. When the car doors opened, time seemed to freeze. Thomas and Elizabeth Miller emerged, their faces a mix of confusion, hope, and fear. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with a cry of pure joy, Sophie and Marie ran to their parents. The sound of sobs and laughter filled the air as the family reunited in a tight embrace, years of separation melting away in seconds. Robert watched, tears streaming silently down his face. When the embrace finally broke, Thomas looked straight at him, recognition and a complex swirl of emotions crossing his features. "Mr. Davies," Thomas said, voice quivering. Robert stepped forward, all trace of his old arrogance replaced by genuine humility. "Thomas, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry." More than words can ever express. Then, to everyone's shock, Robert Davies, the once powerful business magnate, knelt before the Miller family. "I destroyed your lives with my greed and callousness," he went on, voice heavy with remorse. "There's no excuse for what I did, but I beg your forgiveness and offer a chance to make things right." Elizabeth, still clutching her daughters, studied Robert with both compassion and caution. "What do you mean?" Robert rose slowly. "I want to offer you a partnership in the company, not as employees but as equal partners. I'm renaming it Davies Miller Industries and turning it into a force for good." Thomas's mouth fell open. "A partnership? But why?" "Because," Robert replied, glancing at Sophie and Marie, "your daughters taught me the real meaning of family and compassion, and because it's the right thing to do." Over the following days, the Davies mansion became the backdrop for many emotional conversations, intense planning sessions, and surprisingly genuine moments of happiness. The Miller family, initially wary, gradually opened up to the idea of a new beginning. A week after their reunion, Robert held a press conference. Standing before dozens of reporters, he announced the creation of the Sarah Davies Center, an organization dedicated to helping families in need. "This center," Robert declared, with Thomas and Elizabeth at his side, "will be a beacon of hope for those society often forgets. We'll provide job training, educational support, and most of all, a chance to start over." The announcement was met with applause, and to the surprise of many, tears of emotion from some of the journalists, while the adults handled the practical aspects of the partnership and the new center. Sophie and Marie thrived. The mansion, once a symbol of cold wealth, now rang with their laughter and the warmth of a reunited family. One afternoon, as everyone relaxed in the garden, Sophie approached Robert, fiddling with Sarah's necklace at her throat. "Mr. Robert," she said softly,